Hi everyone, welcome to the Open Quality Conference session on WebdriverIO. I hope that you're doing well and staying safe in these times. In this session, I'm going to be talking about my favorite features of WebdriverIO and compare it to other frameworks on the market. A bit about myself. I am Julia Pottinger. I lead QA at QualityWorks Consulting Group. I live in Jamaica, a wonderful island, beautiful people, incredible food. I contribute to the testing community through my course on Test Automation University on WebdriverIO, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Julia Pottinger, as well as my blog, juliapottinger.com. In this session, we're going to define WebdriverIO, tell you a bit about my journey and why I chose WebdriverIO. Then we're going to discuss how you can get started with WebdriverIO, my favorite or top features of WebdriverIO, and then compare WebdriverIO to other frameworks. So you may be wondering, what is WebdriverIO? WebdriverIO is a custom implementation of Selenium WebDriver API. It allows you to set up your test very quickly and very easily through the use of its test runner. The test runner also allows you to write asynchronous code in a synchronous manner so that you don't have to spend a lot of time worrying about promises and avoiding race conditions. It also has a lot of different services that you can integrate with, and I'll be going through these when I talk about my favorite features of WebdriverIO. I first became interested in WebdriverIO about 5 or so years ago when I was trying to find a JavaScript test automation framework to use on a project. I was just coming from using Java, and I found Java at the time to be very verbose, where you have to say locate element by CSS, locate element by XPath, etc. At the time, I was comparing Nightwatch and WebdriverIO. I first started with Nightwatch, and I used Nightwatch on a project. Nightwatch at the time only allowed you to run your project asynchronously. So I spent a lot of time writing promises and callbacks, worrying about timeouts, not getting something done before I need to move on to the next thing. With WebdriverIO, that solved those concerns, and WebdriverIO could also be used for mobile automation, which was something that I was interested in trying out at the time. So for me, in my switch from Java to JavaScript, I found WebdriverIO to meet all the needs that I was looking for. From that time till now, WebdriverIO has been one of my favorite test automation frameworks to use. So let's talk a bit about what are my favorite features of WebdriverIO. The first feature that I love about WebdriverIO is that it is easy to set up. You can set up WebDriver very quickly with its CLI and generate a config file with all that you need to start. Let's do that really quickly. The first thing that you want to do is ensure that you have the correct version of Node and the correct version of NPM. In our terminal, ensuring that we are in the root of our project, we're going to say npm init. This is going to set up a new npm package. On initializing, you'll be prompted to enter a package name, a version, a description, test command, author, etc. You can fill this in as you like, or you can just press enter for each to get started. At the end, they're going to ask you if this is okay, and if it is, then you type yes. If you then go into your folder, you should see that you have a package JSON created for you. We're then going to install some dependencies that we'll need, and we're going to install WebdriverIO by saying npm install WebdriverIO --save-dev. What this does is save it to our dev dependencies. To check that it has been successfully installed, we can go to our package JSON, and we should see in-dev dependencies WebdriverIO version 6, which is the latest version there is. Now that we have installed WebdriverIO, the next thing that we want to do is create our config file. And this config file is going to specify the location of tests, the frameworks that we want to use, reporters, browsers, and just general configuration of the project. WebdriverIO has a CLI interface that makes this very easy for us. So we can say npm install at WebdriverIO/CLI. Then we're going to run our config file. This is going to set up for us all the dependencies that we need, and it also gives us some templates that we can use to get started. Similarly to when we were setting up npm, it's going to ask us some questions, and we're going to go through them, and we can just enter space for the ones we want, and we can also change our selections. So I'm going to select local. I'm going to use Mocha. I want to run my WebdriverIO synchronously. I'm going to leave a space for my specs. And when it asks me if I want it to give me page objects and test files, I'm going to say yes. This is going to give you a set of page objects and test cases that you can run immediately. And at the end, it's going to install all of those dependencies for us. So here I am just selecting the options that I want. WebdriverIO also gives you the option to run your project in TypeScript, but I'll be using JavaScript. You have a lot of reporters that you can use. You press space to select, A to toggle all, and I to invert your selection. I'm going to just stick with spec. And then you can use a service for your test setup. I use Selenium standalone as that allows me to run on Chrome, Firefox, etc. And we can run our test immediately using the command that we see here. So if we look in our project, we will see that we have a test folder with page objects and specs. Specs are our test. So we have a login test, and in our login test, we are going to be going to some URL. We're going to be entering username, password, and we're going to check that we have been logged in. If we take a look at what we got in our login page, we see that it is requiring a parent of page. It uses input username, where it has an ID of username and ID of password, along with a button submit. Then we have a function to log in. It also uses the super open, and we're passing in a text of login. So if we go to that parent page, we can see that this is going to the URL, the internetarucaapp.com, and when we pass in login, it's appending that to the URL. So therefore, we are going to be going to the internet app/login. So WebdriverIO sets you up with a logging test. And if we look quickly at our secure page, we are getting the flash alert, and that flash alert is going to be the success message. So we can go ahead and run this test by using the command npx wdio run wdio.conf.js. And we should see that our test is running on Chrome, and it's going to go to the Internet Oracle app login, entering Tom Smith as the username, entering the password, logging in, and verifying by getting the flash alert that we have been successfully logged in. So we see that our test passed. And that is it. That is how easy it is to set up WebdriverIO. The next thing that I like about WebdriverIO is that it is very well documented and it has an active community. The community is on GitHub. You have access to resources and courses on Test Automation University. There are YouTube channels out there that tell you about WebdriverIO. There are blogs. There are a lot of courses that you can use to get started and to get into advanced stuff with WebdriverIO. WebdriverIO also provides detailed documentation on WebDriver.io, where we can see that it shows you getting started, watch talk, read books, as well as how to support. If we just scroll down on the page, we can see talks about WebdriverIO, how it supports modern web and mobile frameworks such as React, Angular, Polymer, or Vue, and how it supports Puppeteer. It also supports API tools. We can then go into the Getting Started docs, and once we are there, we see all the instructions that we need to start installing WebdriverIO, how to set up WebdriverIO, and it also has a lot of boilerplates. We have boilerplates for Cucumber, we have boilerplates for Jasmine, we have boilerplates for Mocha, we have boilerplates for Angular, etc. WebdriverIO has all the instructions that you would need to set up any reporter or service that they support. So if you just take a look, it's very extensive. The instructions are very detailed. It also gives you details on its API. So how to use the $, how to use the $, how to use the custom functions, how to use the React command to test React apps, etc. The WebdriverIO community on Gitter is very active. As you can see, persons ask questions, those questions are answered, and it has over 6,000 active members that are there and ready to help. I also have a YouTube channel. On this channel, if you go to the playlist, you will see that there's a WebdriverIO playlist. I continuously update this with the latest things that WebDriver has, as well as just some other things that you would want to know when getting started with WebdriverIO, as well as tips and tricks. I also have a course on Test Automation University where I go into full details on WebdriverIO, from how to install it, how to interact with elements, how to do element actions, how to use keyboard and mouse input, scrolling to an element, working with iframes and new tabs, all the waits for displayed, wait for exist, wait until. I compare WebdriverIO version 4 and 5, and I show you how to group test, use data files, add in environments, etc. So far, we have discussed how WebdriverIO is easy to set up, as well as how well documented it is and its active community. Another favorite feature of mine that is very important is the intuitive locator strategy and commands that WebdriverIO has. With any test automation framework, finding elements is one of the most fundamental activities. We need to ensure that we have the correct elements so that our tests aren't flaky and break if something changes. Traditionally, we find elements by using by locators, by CSS, by XPath, etc. However, WebdriverIO has simplified these methods so that we don't have to specify them specifically. We no longer have to say by XPath if we're going to be using an XPath locator. We can just put in that XPath locator or that CSS locator. WebdriverIO transforms the selector locator strategy so that we can just enter it in a way that is easy to write and remember. WebdriverIO does this by using the $sign command and the $sign command if it is that you want to find a single element or multiple elements. Also, it has intuitive commands that are familiar, such as click, get text, is displayed. Once it is that you hear those names, you know exactly what it is, the action that you are going to do. Let's now go on to the WebdriverIO page and look on their selectors. They have CSS query selector and they show you an example. So you just pass in your query selector for CSS. It also shows you link text. If you have a link, you can just say equal and the link text. So here we have a href with the link text WebdriverIO. So what we'll do is we'll put in equal WebdriverIO, which is the link text there, and we'll say link.getText, and that will return to us WebdriverIO. We could also have said link.getAttribute and pass in href, and that would have the href value, which is http webdriver.io. For partial link text, we can use something that partially matches our search value. And you can do this by using the asterisk equal. We have the link text being WebdriverIO. We can use a partial text and say driver, and that would find that partial link text. We would then say asterisk equal driver. And if we say link.getText, it will return to us the link text. Note that you cannot mix multiple selector strategies. You would have to chain them. So you can say $, pass in your header, and then you say dot, which is the chain command, and then pass in your partial link text selector. WebdriverIO also allows us to find elements with certain text. And this is the same technique that can be applied to elements as well. So for example, we have a heading, and our heading says welcome to my page. So you can query this element by calling h1 equal welcome to my page. So what that does, it just returns to you the output. If you say header.getText, it would then return to you what the text is. And if you say get tag name, it will return to you the tag, which in this case is a h1. You can also use query on a partial text. So you don't have to type out the entire welcome to my page. You can just type asterisk equal welcome. The same would work for ID and class name. So instead of h1, which is the tag, you can just say the class name, which is some lm, and you enter the partial text or the full text, and it would work the same. Or you can say #lm, which is the ID, and it would work the same as well. You can also do a partial query by using the asterisk. So you can say .SUMLM for the class name, asterisk equal WebdriverIO, which is a partial text from what we have, which is WebdriverIO is the best. You can also do the same for the ID by saying #lm asterisk equal WebdriverIO. And as usual, you can't mix multiple selector strategies. You have to chain them together. We just mentioned tag name above, and we can use WebdriverIO to query it. So we can just say the tag, and WebdriverIO will find that tag. However, we also have to keep in mind that we use unique elements. So if it's a unique tag on a page, then sure, you can go ahead and use that tag. However, if it's not unique, then you would want to use another selector. But if it is that you want to get all elements that have that tag, you can use the $$ to get all elements with that tag name. For querying elements with a specific name attribute, you can either use a normal CSS3 selector, or you can use the name strategy. So you can pass in something like name equals some value. So in this case, we can say name equal username. And if we do get value on that, we should get back foobar. We should also note that this selector strategy is depreciated and only works in older browsers that are run by JSON Wire Protocol, or if you are using Appium. You can also query using XPath. XPath has a format like //body/div and then open square brackets 6. And that is going to say to you, find the 6th div that is the child of the parent body. So in this example that is here, we can say we want to query the second paragraph. We would say // body and then / the p tag, and in square brackets 2 for the second one, and that would return to us bar foo. So you can find it by ID. There is no specific syntax in WebDriver for ID, but you can use the CSS syntax or the XPath syntax for finding an ID. WebdriverIO also helps you to find elements by using the JS function, so you can use it to find elements using web native APIs. And you can only do this inside of a web context, for example, a browser or some web context in mobile. WebdriverIO also makes mention of mobile selectors such as Android UI Automator, iOS UI Automation, etc., etc., etc. As mentioned before, WebdriverIO allows you to use React selectors. So it provides a way for you to select React components based on the component name. And for that, you have React $sign and React $sign. It allows you to select components and return either a single WebdriverIO element or an array of elements based on if you use React $sign or React $sign. Another thing to note is the custom selector strategies. If your app requires a specific way to fetch elements, you can define yourself a custom selector strategy. This is really awesome, and it gives you a keyword to use. So instead of the $sign or $sign, you would say custom $sign or custom $sign, and that would register the strategy for you and allow you to use it within your test. So we have talked about the different locator strategy that WebdriverIO has. We are now going to look at the different intuitive commands that they have. Very familiar commands, very straightforward commands that says what it does. So if we go to WebdriverIO API docs, we can see the different commands that they have. So if we look at a command like switch window, it immediately tells us what it does. It switches window. It switches focus to a particular tab or window. We can also look at certain commands such as add value. Add value is adding value to a specific object that you have found by a selector. So it is again straightforward. We can look at certain things like click. Click, as it says, clicks on an element. It scrolls to the element and then it clicks on it. As we see here, we have drag and drop, which drags an item from one position and drops it to the next position. So you have the target position that you want it to go, and you have the selector. The selector is where it is currently at. The target is where you want it to go. And if we look at some others, is enabled, it just checks that the element is enabled and returns true or false. Same thing with get text. Get text, it just gets the text content from a DOM element. And so if we just scroll through and we just look at all the different selectors, get size, get property, get tab name, the name itself is very straightforward and indicates exactly what it does. Move to moves the cursor to an element. Is selected, is that item selected. So this is specific to a checkbox or a radio button, and it returns true or false if it is selected. So pretty straightforward stuff. Keys has to do with sending a sequence of keystrokes to the active elements. So you can do browser.keys and it sends the value. We used keys earlier today as well. So all of this is just to say that WebdriverIO has very intuitive commands. If you check the API doc, you can go ahead and get started. You can just read through, find all the different commands that you want to use and apply it to your project. Cross-browser testing. WebdriverIO allows us to run tests on Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Edge, and Internet Explorer. This is very important when you're testing your application across multiple browsers that your customers use. When we first ran our test, that was run on Chrome. To change the browser that we run it on, we go into our WebdriverIO.config file and we go down to our capabilities. In our capabilities, we can change the browser name. So we're going to change the browser name from Chrome to Firefox. Once we do that, if we run our test again, we should see that our test run and it says browser name Firefox and it runs it on Firefox. We can also run our test on Microsoft Edge. So let's go ahead and set up our test to run on Edge. The first thing that we're going to do is download Microsoft Edge browser from microsoft.com/edge. It has several options based on your operating system. I am downloading for Mac. We're going to accept and download. Follow the instructions to install the browser, and if there are any updates that you need to do those. We are then going to install the WebDriver for Microsoft Edge by going to developer.microsoft.com/Microsoft-Edge/tools/WebDriver. You need to know the browser version that you are using. This will help you to determine which Microsoft Edge driver you should download. So if you go into your About Microsoft Edge, you should see the version that you are using. Search for that version and download it based on your operating system. Save the Microsoft Edge driver to the root of your project. In your config file, we are going to enter the browser details that we are going to be using to run our test. In this case, it is Microsoft Edge. Set your browser name to Microsoft Edge, enter your browser version, and set your path. To run our test, we must first start the Microsoft Edge driver, and we do that by saying /MS Edge driver space -port equal 4444. Open a new terminal and run your test. For me, this normally takes a bit of time to start up, so if you don't see it immediately opening, give it some time. If it is that you followed those instructions and your test did not run and you get an error, go back into your config file, remove browser version and path, and move path outside of your capabilities and rerun your test. Your test should now successfully run on Microsoft Edge. So, I have shown you how to run your tests on Chrome, Firefox, and Microsoft Edge. For the other browsers, you can check the WebdriverIO documentation to find out how to run those. The next important feature of WebdriverIO that I have found to be very useful is its ability to connect with a variety of services. It allows you to do mobile testing using Appium. This is for native devices for iOS and Android. It also facilitates cross-browser and multiple device testing by using Sauce Labs and BrowserStack, in addition to it being able to run on multiple browsers. Visual testing, if you are interested, can be done with AppyTools, and you can also use Slack for notifications and Docker for containers. When going through WebdriverIO website previously, I had shown you some of the other services that it also connects with. If you want to learn more about mobile automation using Appium and WebdriverIO, There is a course on Test Automation University that you can check. It shows you how to set up, how to install dependencies, how to use desired capabilities, how to find elements, how to scroll, do element interactions, do sessions, timeouts. WebdriverIO also has detailed documentation on the Appium service that you can check out as well. Aptitude service is important, which is that you want to do visual regression testing, and WebdriverIO shows this documentation. In addition to the documentation that is on WebdriverIO, there is a course on Test Automation University as well that shows you how to get started using automated visual testing with Aptitudes and WebdriverIO. It goes into detail showing you how to do checkpoints, batches, integration, etc. So you can get up and running in no time. Another service is BrowserStack, and for BrowserStack, you just install WebdriverIO BrowserStack-service as a dev dependency, and the WebdriverIO documentation shows you the configuration that you use. So you have your user key and your access key, and you add the service BrowserStack. There's also a cross-browser testing service that you can use if you're interested. There is DevTools services, etc. So WebdriverIO has a lot of different services that you can check out to do the different tasks for your specific project. The last thing that I want to talk about regarding WebdriverIO and my favorite features is its ability to use multiple tabs or windows as well as iframes. WebdriverIO works very well when you are trying to switch windows or tab or interact with an iframe. If we go to the Internet Heroku app /iframe, we will see an iframe that we can do some testing on. So it has an iframe that has an ID of MCE0IFR. There is also a body that you can enter some text, and that has an ID of tinymce. What we're going to do here is switch to the iframe and change the content. And then we're going to verify that the content that is there is now the content that we had entered. So if we go back to our tests that we have so far, we're going to create an iframe page. And this page is going to be similar to the login page that we had before. We're going to require the parent page and extend it. We're going to have two selectors, the iframe and the iframe body. We're also going to have that open function from the parent. And we're going to pass in iframe. And if you remember what this does, it appends to the Heroku URL iframe. So it's going to go to Heroku /iframe. And we also have a send text to body function, and all this does, it waits for the iframe body to be displayed, clears the value that is in it, and then enter some text that we want. We also need to have a test. So we're going to create an iframe.js test, and that is just going to have the page object for our iframe page. We're going to have a describe switch to iframe. It should switch to iframe and enter text. We're going to open the iframe page, and we're going to wait for the iframe to be displayed. The function here to use is switch to frame. The switch to frame command allows you to change focus to another frame on the page, and you do that by passing in the iframe ID. If the ID is null, then it just switches to the default content. So we can go ahead and run our test using the same command, but this time we want to only run one specific test, which is our iframe test. So we're going to say --spec. That is the command that WebdriverIO uses to run a single file, and we're going to add the path of the file. So our path is going to be test, then specs, and then the name of our test file. So if we run our test, we see that it goes to the iframe, clears the text, changes it, and it verifies that the text is correct. We can also do something similar for our switch window. If we go to the internet erukoapp.com/windows, we will see a link that says click here. If we click on that link, it opens up a new tab. We want to inspect the click and we see that it is just a class example with an anchor tag. And if we go to the new window, we see that it is H3. So what we're going to do is to create our switch window page that has those two locators. And we're going to extend the open functionality and pass in Windows so that it will append Windows to the Internet Uruko app URL. In our test, we're going to say open window page, wait for the link to be displayed, click the link, and then we're going to switch to the new window. So the switch to window function, it accepts a partial URL or a full URL or some title of the new window that you are looking for. So I didn't type out the full URL, I just typed out a partial URL, which is windows/new. And then we're going to expect the window page to have the text to say new window. And we can go ahead and run that again and add --spec and the path, which is test/specs/switchwindow.js, and our test should pass. So we see here that it opens the new window and it goes to the new window that has been opened. And that is it. We have successfully used iframes and switch to window or switch to tab in WebdriverIO. After talking about all those amazing features that WebdriverIO has, you may be thinking, how does it compare to the other frameworks that are out there? For today, I'll just be comparing it to two frameworks, Cypress.io and nightwatch.js. As demonstrated, you can run your tests on multiple browsers with WebdriverIO: Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Edge, Opera, Internet Explorer. The same can be done on Nightwatch. However, Cypress.io is a bit limited when it comes to that. You can only run your tests on Chromium-based browsers and Firefox. So this is one thing that you have to consider for your specific project. Am I going to need to run my test on all these different browsers? And you can consider this factor along with the other factors that I'll mention, and then select the framework that is best suited for your project. The frameworks that are out there for JavaScript test automation is not limited to these three. You have Protractor and you have Puppeteer, and you have additional frameworks that you can use. WebdriverIO also handles multiple tabs and iframes, same to Nightwatch. However, Cypress does not support multiple browser tabs, and you can't use Cypress to drive two browsers at the same time, and iframe support is limited. If you are looking for native mobile automation, the best bet is WebdriverIO because it supports Appium for mobile testing. Based on Cypress documentation on its website, it says that Cypress will never be able to run on a native mobile application. Nightwatch, though, does support Appium and native mobile testing. I've never used it, and I did a bit of research and it was hard to find any proper documentation of this. When it comes to locator strategies, Cypress only supports CSS, but there is a plugin that you can use to add XPath. Nightwatch supports CSS, XPath, probably link text, etc. WebdriverIO, as I showed, supports in great detail a lot of locator strategies that you can use. CSS, XPath, React, link text, tags, you name it, WebdriverIO supports that. The final tool that we want to talk about is synchronous or asynchronous application. For me, this is a make or break because I like writing my tests in synchronous format. I don't want to be worrying about promises and callbacks. WebdriverIO and Cypress supports synchronous calls. From my knowledge, nightwatch only supports asynchronous calls. When it comes to supporting BDD and TDD testing frameworks, WebdriverIO has support for most of them. You can use Mocha, Git as extensions for Cucumber, and there's also a course on using Cucumber with WebdriverIO on Test Automation University that you can check out as well. Cypress is an all-in-one testing framework. It has its own assertion library with mocking and stubbing. For nightwatch, it's a similar all-in-one testing framework, and these all-in-ones doesn't allow you much choices because it has its own testing framework. So if it is that you want to add on something else, it may be a bit difficult to do, but it's possible. With all this in mind, which framework are you using in your projects and why? We are almost at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for sticking around and talking with me. I hope it's been a pleasure. The biggest takeaways that I want you to get from today is the top features of WebdriverIO, and there are many. There are some that I didn't mention. These are my top or favorite features. It allows you to run your tests on multiple browsers. It's easy to set up, it's well documented and has an active community. It allows you to run your tests on multiple tabs and frames. It supports a lot of different services, Apple tools for automated visual testing, Docker, Sauce Labs, Browser Stack, Appium, Slack, etc. And an important point, when comparing frameworks, ensure that you have an automation strategy and select the framework that works best for your needs, considering all the different factors. Thank you so much for coming. Let's stay connected. You can follow me on Twitter at iluge876. You can also send an email if you are interested in working with QualityWorks to jpottinger@qualityworkscg.com. You can also visit my blog on juliapottinger.com. And be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel on youtube.com/juliapottinger. Have a great rest of the day, stay safe, and I hope that you have learned a lot about WebdriverIO and it's now one of your top frameworks. Thank you.